Welcome back to Manhwa Unlocked. Hit that subscribe button and let's unlock another world.
It was a beautiful sunny day. Preparations for the graduation were in full swing. Two friends were calmly walking through the streets of the city. Nothing foretold trouble, but suddenly the ground beneath one of the boys' feet seemed to disappear. For no reason, he fell through the ground. His friend, who was walking beside him, only managed to shout his name, "Jason!" The boy was literally carried into the depths. It turned out that he had fallen into hell. At first, he was completely bewildered. Towering rocks, the bones of monsters lay around, and above his head stretched a sky as scarlet as molten lava. Before he could even understand where he had ended up, he saw a terrible sight. Monstrous creatures were fighting around him, the likes of which he had never seen. In the few minutes he spent there, Jason understood the main thing. In this world, only the strongest survive, and the loser becomes prey. What he saw caused him great panic. He could not understand how he had ended up here. Already after 10 days, his only desire was simply to find anything to eat. Seeing the rotting body of a monster, he realized he had no choice. It was the only food. With disgust, he began scraping pieces of meat from the bones. He had to eat that rot, otherwise he would die of hunger. Suddenly, he noticed a shadow appearing behind him. As expected, it turned out to be another monster, thirsting for his death. In such a situation, there was only one option left: to adapt. Even ordinary stones could become salvation. In fear, he began throwing at the monster everything that came to hand. Fortunately, one of the stones hit the monster right in the eye. In pain, it retreated and disappeared. That was how every day went, a struggle for life, fear, and despair. Jason missed his loved ones the most. On the 39th day, he began to get used to the local conditions and even found himself a weapon. He realized that to survive, he would have to kill everyone who threatened his life. By the 51st day, he had already found a place where he could sleep relatively safely. To survive, he had to give up everything human. Even the feeling of disgust became a luxury, because obtaining food was incredibly difficult. And suddenly, a strange level-up icon appeared before his eyes. Jason decided he was going insane. After solitude and the experienced stress, anyone could think so. But it was not a hallucination. He really could level up, and with each increase, his strength multiplied many times. 7 years later, he reached level 24 and could now destroy most monsters with a single blow. After 24 years filled with battles and suffering, Jason managed to forge for himself a huge sword from rare ore, mined from a steel knight. With that blade, he became virtually invulnerable. Even the strongest monsters could not oppose him. Jason struck down everything he encountered on his way. Decades passed, and 51 years later, he was already able to behead a dreadful ancient monster so powerful that even in this world, it was considered the embodiment of horror. 79 years and 365 days had passed since the very moment Jason found himself in this merciless world, and now he stood face to face with his ultimate goal. Finally, the day came when he could meet the Demon King himself. During that time, he even managed to find a companion, a small demon in the form of a flying ember. Jason burned with anticipation. He wanted to see those who had dragged him into this hellish world and doomed him to endless trials. On the way to the castle, he destroyed without the slightest effort all the enemies who dared stand in his path. During the time he had spent here, Jason had become so powerful that most of the monsters he met could not compare to him. And so he, strengthened and tempered by countless battles, easily reached the very guardian of the Demon King, ready to become the last obstacle on his path. The guardian grew angry when he saw that a human had dared to break into the Demon King's castle, and without ceremony immediately dealt a crushing blow. But decades of battles had not been in vain, and Jason easily blocked that attack, remaining unshaken. After parrying the blow, he immediately went on the offensive and began rapidly counterattacking his opponent. With a deft movement, Jason sliced through the demon's flesh and cut off his arm. His companion warned that the enemy was strong and needed to be finished as soon as possible, not giving him time to recover. Having lost his arm, the Guardian fell into a frenzy and was already preparing to deliver a new series of furious blows. But when he looked down, he saw a huge hole in his chest from Jason's sword. From the severity of the wound, it was clear that the demon was doomed and his strength was rapidly leaving his body. The Guardian fell, and now it was obvious that the Demon King would be enraged, but Jason understood that perfectly. He did not seek victory for the sake of power. What mattered to him was something completely different, and the reason for his journey was another. Jason had spent 80 long years in hell, fighting monsters for survival. Every monster he encountered had its own story and reason for ending up in this cruel world. Therefore, Jason wanted only one thing: to ask the Demon King why he, of all people, had ended up here. He didn't even think about asking it politely. The price of the time he had spent was too great. It was the price for being dragged into hell and forced to suffer for long 8 decades. Climbing ever closer to the castle, Jason was ready to get an answer or take full revenge for everything. But suddenly, he woke up in a completely different place and immediately felt that everything around him had changed. Looking around, he noticed an IV drip beside him and realized he was in a hospital. Apparently, it was a dream about Earth, but the hero hadn't seen dreams of that world for 30 years. However, one question tormented him. Why a hospital and not some other place? Soon, Jason realized that he couldn't even move his own hand. At that moment, he heard someone nearby drop a metal food tray. Turning his head, he saw a woman looking at him with obvious astonishment. Jason didn't understand what was happening and felt completely lost. Everything became clear only when the woman called him her son. He didn't react in any way, thinking that all of this was still just a dream. But one question wouldn't let him go. Why did everything feel so real? Gradually, he began to recall the events that had happened to him in hell. It turned out that he had indeed reached the throne hall of the Demon King himself. Moreover, he had managed to achieve the long-awaited victory over him. But caught up in the battle, he never heard the ruler's answer to his question. After killing the king, Jason himself became the absolute ruler of hell. And suddenly, before him appeared that same level up button once again. But now it asked him whether he wanted to return to Earth. All those 80 years, he had prayed only for one thing: to return to his own world, dreaming of seeing his home and loved ones again. After spending so much time in that insane world of monsters and constant danger, now he had not a single reason to refuse the chance. With determination and unshakable confidence, Jason pressed the button that shone before him, as if promising a long-awaited return home. Suddenly, a bright, blinding light flared before him, so intense that he had to close his eyes. When he opened them again, a doctor in a white coat stood before him, carefully watching his reaction, as if checking whether he had regained consciousness. From the conversations between his relatives and the doctor, Jason understood that he had been in a long coma and had been cut off from the real world all this time. Not understanding what was happening, Jason suddenly began to scream loudly, releasing the emotions and fear that had bound him for so long. Hearing the screams, everyone in the ward hurried to calm him, afraid that he might harm himself or completely break down. He could not understand when and how he had moved into reality, and why he had suddenly received a notification from the system itself. The doctor, who had been watching over him all this time, carefully approached and began to gently calm him, trying to bring Jason to an understanding of what was happening. But Jason, seized by panic, suddenly began to resist and bit the doctor's hand, not understanding what he was doing or why. What the doctor did to him after that, he didn't understand. Perhaps a paralyzing drug, or maybe some kind of magic that deprived him of strength. How he had lived to this moment, Jason couldn't comprehend at all. Everything that was happening seemed strange and dangerous. He still thought he was in hell, and everything around him was just hallucinations, with enemies trying to use it to kill him. But Jason knew he would not give up so easily after everything he had been through, and his will to live was stronger than fear. He gathered his last strength and prepared to make decisions on which his fate and return home would depend. The loud noises coming from the ward were heard by two orderlies who rushed in to help. They immediately grabbed Jason by the arms and began to calm him down. Suddenly, the main character abruptly fell silent, as if he had seen something. His skin instantly turned pale and fear was visible in his eyes. It turned out that in the window, he saw a wormhole that had appeared right above the city itself. Only with the help of two more people did they manage to lay Jason on the bed. But even then, he didn't want to give up and kept trying to break free. Therefore, the doctors had to inject a sedative directly into his neck. Gradually, Jason began to calm down. Soon, he completely fell asleep. At that time, the news began reporting that around 9 in the morning, new gates had opened above Songpagu. But a group of hunters responsible for that area had already been dispatched to the scene. Upon arrival, they immediately began killing all the monsters that had crawled out of the wormhole. The battle continued. The hunters combed the area, clearing it of dangerous creatures threatening the city. During the battle, one of the hunters received a call from the head of the organization. He was asking about the approximate time of mission completion. Judging by how the battle was going, the hunters expected to finish in about an hour. The head was monitoring everything happening on the battlefield, as well as observing the events afterward. Therefore, he ordered to be informed immediately once the mission was complete. At that moment, the effect of the sedative was beginning to wear off. When Jason opened his eyes, he saw before him the very head of the hunters. When the head addressed him by name, he didn't immediately recognize who was standing in front of him. It was Chan-ho, the friend he had been walking with before ending up in hell. He began asking how Jason was feeling since he had been in a coma for 10 whole years. After he suddenly collapsed on the street, he had lain in a hospital bed all this time. For Jason, those 10 years in hell had felt like 80. After he ended up in the hospital, his mother worked tirelessly. Because of the hospital expenses, she even had to take on 2 jobs. The most important thing now was for Jason to recover as quickly as possible and return to his former self, and he didn't have to worry about work. Chun-ho had saved a position for him. Gradually, the main character began to recover. He was even allowed to walk around the hospital grounds, though still in a wheelchair. This worried him deeply, as in such a state he couldn't even help his family. That could lead to many troubles and make him a heavy burden for his family. After all, reality here was no less cruel than hell itself. Suddenly, they stopped abruptly, and his mother began trembling with fear. In front of them stood two men who clearly knew his mother. They were enforcers. They had come for the money Jason's mother had once borrowed for his treatment. She begged them to give her a little more time to prepare the money by next month. But they didn't believe her, as they had heard that more than once. How could an ordinary woman with a sick child find such a large sum in such a short time? The main character's mother grabbed the man's arm, still hoping they would grant her a delay. But he didn't need simple promises. He pushed the woman away and ordered her never to touch him again, not even with a finger. Jason was enraged by the men's behavior. This time, the enforcers weren't planning to negotiate peacefully. She begged them not to do anything to her in front of her child. But the debt hadn't been repaid for 2 years, and these men were ready to do anything to get it back. The man began beating the woman, thinking that fear would make her repay the money faster. All of this happened right before Jason's eyes, and he was furious at what he saw. He couldn't bear it any longer. But sitting in a wheelchair and unable to stand, he began insulting the man to draw their attention to himself. It worked. They left his mother alone, but now their aggression was directed at Jason himself. One of them grabbed Jason by his hoodie and lifted him up. His face showed that the hero's words had angered him so much he was ready to beat even a wheelchair patient. Seeing this, his mother begged Jason to apologize quickly so they would leave him alone. But Jason stayed silent. Then she turned to the man himself, insisting that her child was just a patient. But these men knew no mercy. For money, they could do anything. Even in such a condition, Jason wasn't afraid of them. He continued to insult one of the men, calling him pathetic. At those words, the man's eyes filled with blood and he flew into a furious rage. After that, he threw Jason to the ground with all his strength. But he didn't stop there. He approached and began kicking him. The main character could only cover his head with his hands and endure everything being done to him. If his body hadn't been so helpless, he could have at least fought back a little. But now he could only lie there and groan in pain. Jason's mother tried to help him, but the second man grabbed her arm, preventing her from doing anything. Continuing to beat Jason, he smiled and ordered him to repeat what he had called him earlier. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the same window Jason had seen before in hell appeared before his eyes. It said that a divine quest would soon begin, and if he refused, he would receive no reward. His doubts didn't last long. After all, only with the help of such windows had Jason managed to survive in hell all those years. Thanks to them, he increased his strength and could resist the monsters. After accepting the quest, he saw the world suddenly freeze. Jason immediately realized this happened because he had agreed to the system's mission. Now the window said he had to reach the designated location, and as a reward, he would receive medicine capable of restoring his helpless body. But what intrigued him even more was another point in the reward. After completing the quest, he would gain an additional realization plus 10% to his health. The place he needed to reach was only 10 meters away, but the problem was that he couldn't stand up. He was ready to crawl there if it meant he could regain his former condition. Beaten and wounded, he barely moved his hands, trying to reach the point marked in the mission. But with the limited time given, completing it at such a pace was extremely difficult. Determination alone wasn't enough, so Jason began to think about how to make the task easier. The system had never given impossible trials, which meant there had to be another way this time too. The solution turned out to be quite simple. He just had to correctly understand the goal of the quest. After all, it didn't specify how exactly he had to reach the location. That meant he could use any method available to him. Unfortunately, he realized this too late. Most of the time had already passed, and only a few seconds remained. Fortunately, his wheelchair was right beside him. Gathering the last of his strength, he painfully climbed onto it, and immediately rushed toward the destination. There was no time to waste. Only 9 seconds remained until the end of the mission. Despite his injuries and exhaustion, Jason sped toward the marked point. In the final seconds, he managed to reach it, completing the system's quest. As promised, his reward for the effort was an elixir that restored 10% of his former strength and healed all the wounds he had sustained that day. Jason didn't hesitate and drank the entire flask of red blood-like elixir at once. Instantly, his body filled with strength and the pain tormenting him vanished. The result of the medicine's effect. As soon as the mission was completed, the world returned to normal, and the thugs who had been beating Jason moments ago couldn't understand where he had disappeared to. As soon as the mission was completed, the world returned to normal, and the thugs who had been beating Jason moments ago couldn't understand where he had disappeared to. The hospital security arrived. apparently called by concerned passersby. While the guards dealt with the men, Jason's mother spotted her son on the other side of the park. The man who had kicked him couldn't believe how Jason ended up there, since just a minute ago he had been lying right under his feet. But his partner said they'd better leave, or they'd be in big trouble if caught. The thug reluctantly agreed, and they disappeared. Night had already fallen, and most of the hospital's patients were asleep. Only Jason couldn't close his eyes, wondering how that window had appeared before him again. He tried several times to summon it once more, but nothing happened, and he was about to give up. These thoughts kept him awake. Besides, he needed to restore his body as soon as possible before the thugs returned, which meant he had to create a new quest for himself. And as soon as he thought about it, a message appeared before his eyes. The Pantheon awaits the arrival of perfection. Before he could even understand what was happening, Jason found himself in some other world. Perhaps it was a dream. But then another system window appeared, stating that Jason had arrived in the Pantheon and must complete his realization by performing tasks. There were more and more questions, but one thing he knew for sure. This was not a dream. Without hesitation, Jason began to complete the missions, as it was his only chance to recover and regain his former power. The system's second task was to destroy a certain object. As soon as he accepted, a blue sphere shaped like a monster's face appeared before him. Gathering all his strength into his fist, Jason attacked the object without delay and easily shattered it into pieces. The third mission of the system was to run a distance of 10 kilometers. Jason handled this task without much difficulty as well. The next mission was to complete 1,000 push-ups in just 2 hours. That too didn't cause him much trouble. After finishing these tasks, Jason's realization rate reached 55%, but the main character wasn't too happy about it. After everything he had done, his progress was just a bit over half, and the reward was merely some kind of tonic. The moment he thought that the system should give him a proper mission, a new window immediately appeared before him. It stated that he had to defeat a specified opponent, the Weeping Demon. Suddenly, a pillar of light appeared before him, and from it emerged the demon himself. Back in hell, Jason had barely survived their encounter, yet now he was strangely glad to see him again. Without hesitation, the demon attacked the main character. Jason barely managed to dodge the strikes. He still hadn't regained the form he once had in hell. Gathering his strength, he launched his first attack, but the demon instantly threw him aside, inflicting serious injuries. Despite that, Jason didn't give up and kept dodging the blows. Soon, however, the demon caught him in his claw and began to squeeze. It is literally tearing Jason's insides apart. Knowing that he had defeated similar monsters in hell, Jason tried to recall how exactly he had managed it before. It didn't take long. The needed images surfaced in his memory. Suddenly, the demon's hand shattered into small pieces. Jason remembered that in hell, he had a sword he could summon. With the weapon in hand, things became easier. After a few swings, he managed to kill the monster. Another quest was completed, and Jason's realization rate now stood at 55%. After that, Jason returned back to Earth. Dawn was breaking outside, and the first rays of sunlight gently shone through the windows. The light in the hospital room suddenly flickered on. The creak of an opening window could be heard as a soft morning breeze rushed inside. A moment later, Jason's mother woke up, startled by a bright ray falling right across her face. Before her stood the silhouette of a man. She wasn't fully awake yet and didn't immediately recognize him. But as her eyes adjusted to the light, the woman gasped in horror and joy at the same time. It was her son standing before her. It was unbelievable. He hadn't even been able to walk, yet now he stood on his own legs and looked completely healthy. His body seemed transformed. Strong, fit, as if he had been training his whole life. Not a trace of illness remained. Jason smiled softly and said, "Mom." Meanwhile, life in the hospital went on as usual. The time for routine checkups was approaching. Jason sat calmly on the bed, waiting for the nurse to examine him. After the checkup, the doctor was stunned. Just 2 weeks earlier, the prognosis had been for at least 6 months of rehabilitation, yet now the young man looked completely healthy. In mild confusion, Jason's mother asked the doctor how such a thing was possible. Her son moved as if he had never been ill at all. The doctor only shrugged. In his entire practice, he had never seen anything like it. From a medical standpoint, it was inexplicable. The woman grew frightened. What if something unnatural was happening? But the doctor reassured her, suggesting that Jason might simply have rare, innate physiological traits. At that moment, Jason was getting irritated. They examined him too thoroughly, like some rare specimen. Even the nurse couldn't hide her astonishment at such rapid recovery. When everyone left, the young man clenched his fists. His movements were steady. His arms and legs obeyed completely. Yet he still felt that his full strength hadn't returned, which meant he had to keep training. Stepping into the corridor, Jason noticed his mother talking to a woman. As he got closer, he heard his mother thanking the nurse who had taken care of him throughout the years he spent in a coma. The nurse only smiled sadly. She knew how much those years had cost the woman. The fact that Jason had even woken up was a miracle in itself. The fact that he could walk. A double one. Hearing this, Jason was shocked. He could hardly imagine the suffering his mother had endured over those 10 long years. At that very moment, he swore to himself that he would become stronger. No matter what happened, he would never let her suffer again. In solitude in the hospital bathroom, he once again said the keyword, Pantheon. In solitude in the hospital bathroom, he once again said the keyword, Pantheon. Once more, he found himself in the very same world where he had completed his previous missions. But now he had a goal: to finish the restoration as soon as possible. This time, the system offered him a special quest. Jason could choose the difficulty level himself. Without thinking twice, he decided to finish everything quickly. His choice fell on the most dangerous level, Hell. A black sphere appeared before him, as if woven from darkness itself. When it burst apart, a warrior with a huge sword in his hands emerged from within. Jason looked closely and felt a chill run down his spine. Standing before him was himself, or rather, his reflection from Hell. He remembered, after killing the Demon King in Hell, he had become the strongest being there. So it was no surprise that his opponent turned out to be a doppelganger, a copy of Jason possessing all his former power. The double didn't waste time and attacked immediately. Luckily, Jason managed to draw his sword in time. He blocked the first strike, but the doppelganger instantly delivered a second blow. A fierce exchange of strikes began. Blades clashed, slicing through the air. Several hits still landed on Jason. Fresh wounds appeared on his body. The guy realized that in his current state, he couldn't match his opponent in strength or speed. The longer the fight lasted, the worse it would get for him. Suddenly, one of the strikes hit. The enemy knocked him to the side, throwing him to the ground. Jason just smirked. The fake indeed surpassed his current self. But he wasn't planning to retreat. Today, victory would be his. Nothing could stop him, not even such a strong opponent. Activating the Bloodseeker's Wrath ability, he felt a surge of rage. His speed, endurance, and strength increased several times over. He easily dodged the next blow of the double, as if he had become a completely different person. Instantly, he grabbed the enemy by the head and slammed him into the ground with all his might. All that was left was to finish the opponent with his sword. But at the last moment, the doppelganger managed to dodge. He jumped back several meters, and to Jason's horror, he activated the same ability, Bloodseeker's Wrath. Empowered, he struck lightning fast. The blade slashed Jason's back. At that moment, in reality, someone knocked on the bathroom door. His body on the floor stood motionless, as if asleep, while his soul fought in the Pantheon. It was the janitor. She wanted to clean the restroom, but the door was locked. She was about to open it with a spare key. Meanwhile, in the Pantheon, the deadly battle continued. If Jason lost here, everything he had achieved would disappear. He frantically thought of how to turn the tide of the fight, and suddenly he remembered the inventory. The system menu flashed before his eyes. At the same time, the janitor had almost opened the door, but she got distracted. Someone called her to the 3rd floor. The woman left, and Jason sighed in relief. Now he could act. In the inventory, he found many potions obtained from previous quests. Among them was one special potion. It increased endurance by 20%. He rarely used it before, but now was the perfect time. If I drink 5, I'll be able to fight on equal terms, flashed through his mind. But he had almost no time. The enemy wasn't going to wait. Jason managed to drink only 1 potion, but already felt his strength returning. He confidently blocked the next attack. Without wasting a second, he pulled out 3 more bottles and drank them in one go. Energy filled his body. Continuing to fight, he managed to finish the 5th potion as well. But even with full endurance, the battle remained incredibly hard. The enemy grabbed him by the throat and pinned him to the ground. The double's blade was already about to pierce his chest. In despair, Jason opened the inventory again. He managed to block the strike, then gathered all his strength and delivered a crushing blow. The blade pierced through the enemy's body. The doppelganger shuddered, let out a terrible roar, and disintegrated, vanishing as if it had never existed. New system windows flashed before Jason's eyes. The messages stated that the restoration was complete. Now Jason could use the power of Hell even in the world of the living, no longer limited to mere memories of it. But along with the power came his old scars. Each of them reminded Jason of the harsh times spent in Hell, the pain and suffering he had endured. These marks were not just wounds, they had become symbols of survival. Jason was about to return to Earth, feeling a strange excitement. But suddenly, the system notified him of several missed messages. They said that the new sovereign of Hell was none other than him. And because Jason had returned to Earth, the realm had been temporarily sealed. All demons of the Pantheon were to await the return of their lord. It turned out they were all waiting for Jason's help. But remembering how, for those 80 years, he had suffered because of demons, the hero only smirked. He had no intention of helping them. With those thoughts, Jason commanded the system to open a portal back to Earth. The demons remained imprisoned, tormented by their endless weight, bound by the seal of hell. Jason stepped outside and felt the first rays of sunlight fall upon his face. It was a beautiful, clear day, as if nature itself welcomed his return. Remembering the past and rejoicing in the power that once again filled his body, he playfully did one-handed push-ups by the window of his hospital room. At that moment, the door quietly opened. Lena, the doctor, and his mother entered the room. Their gazes immediately fell upon Jason's transformed body. The doctor, barely hiding his astonishment, whispered that perhaps Jason was indeed an awakened, but his mother only shook her head. She refused to believe it. The doctor began to reassure her, saying there were no clear signs of awakening yet, though the speed of the young man's recovery was impossible to explain by normal means. His mother looked at her son with tears in her eyes. She couldn't understand how such a miracle, or perhaps a curse, could have happened to her child. The hospital had done everything possible, but now the rest would have to be handled by the Association of the Awakened. Hearing this, Jason frowned. He couldn't understand what had happened to the world while he was gone, who these awakened were, and why only some association could now decide his fate. Because Jason recovered too quickly, he was discharged rather soon. Together with his mother, they went home. On the way, he tried to process what the doctor had told him. Lately, Jason had pretended not to notice the anxiety in his mother's eyes and cared only about the system's quests. But now it was obvious she was hiding something. What happened during those 10 years of my absence? He thought, looking out the car window. The city they were driving through seemed heavily damaged. Sirens stood on every corner, warning of possible danger. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the whole world lived in anticipation of disaster. Returning to his old house, which he hadn't been in for so long, Jason felt mixed emotions, longing and a strange unease. But as he entered, he noticed someone rummaging through the drawer, pulling out money. It was a young girl with pink hair, dressed in a tracksuit. Jason immediately decided to find out who she was. The girl turned around sharply. She was so shocked by his appearance that she couldn't utter a single word. At that moment, his mother entered the house. Seeing the girl, she sternly asked Jisoo where she had been all this time and why she hadn't answered her calls. Hearing that name, Jason froze in total shock. While he stood there stunned, the girl quickly turned away and left the house. Only then did Jason realize that was his younger sister. As she left, she remarked coldly that Jason looked great, while she and their mother had to live in hell every single day. His mother tried to stop her, begging her to stay, but Jisoo didn't even look back. At that moment, there was a loud knock at the door. Someone shouted, demanding it be opened. It turned out to be the debt collectors to whom his mother owed money. They kept pounding on the door, threatening to break it down if no one answered. No one replied, and they began to think they might have the wrong address. But suddenly, the door swung open by itself, and Jisoo appeared on the threshold. She coldly told them not to make such a fuss, and without waiting for an answer, left to mind her own business. Now the door remained open, and the men easily entered the yard. Jason's mother, panicking, began to apologize, explaining that she had planned to call them herself, as they had just returned from the hospital that very day. She took out all the money she had with her and tried to hand it to the collectors, but one of the men only grinned and struck her. The money scattered across the yard. That wasn't enough for them, They had come for a much larger sum. Seeing his mother fall to the ground, Jason felt rage flare up in his chest. He lunged forward and furiously beat the man who had dared to raise his hand against his mother. His partner witnessed it all, and upon seeing Jason's face, he immediately recognized him. But Jason himself wanted to find them. After all, they were the ones who had once beaten his mother and him. Now it was time to settle the score. He grabbed the thug by the head, squeezing it with an iron grip. Then, with furious strength, he began to beat him, releasing all his pent-up rage. Bleeding, the thug noticed an old chair in the yard. Grabbing it, he lunged at Jason in a fit of anger. But Jason shattered the chair with a single blow and immediately punched the man in the face. The strike was so powerful that the opponent flew across the yard and crashed several meters away. Realizing they couldn't win, the second thug pulled a knife from the holster on his belt. He tried to intimidate Jason, waving the blade, but Jason only approached him calmly. Step by step, with a cold smile, Jason grabbed his wrist, the one holding the knife. With a simple motion, he broke the bone, making the man howl in pain. Then the second thug, already lying on the ground, began shouting threats, claiming that after this, Jason would never live peacefully again. To that, Jason smiled and replied that he wouldn't have any problems if he simply killed them right now. At that moment, his mother screamed, begging him to stop. Taking advantage of the pause, the thugs barely managed to get up and ran away. Already in the car, they discussed how they would still collect the debt. Returning empty-handed to their boss was suicide. He had told them to at least get a signed note. On the way, one of the men noticed Jason's sister walking along the sidewalk. Their eyes met, and it was clear they intended to use her as a hostage. Meanwhile, Jason's mother began to tell him the whole truth about the debts. After his fall, she had rushed from hospital to hospital, selling everything she could. The house and the family shop had to be given up, but even that money didn't last long. In desperation, she took a loan from private moneylenders. But the debt grew rapidly and the interest crushed her harder each day. She had nothing left to pay with, so she worked herself to exhaustion. Days at a gas station, nights in a store. Even his sister dropped out of school to help the family. Life had turned into pure survival. Suddenly, his mother's phone rang. It was those same thugs. Jason snatched the phone from her hand. On the other end, he heard they had his sister. They gave him 24 hours to find 100 million. Otherwise, her life would be in deadly danger. Jason said nothing to his mother. He only promised to return alive and left the house. A system window appeared before his eyes. The system reported, bonus reward. Release of a basic skill. 4 abilities were available to choose from. Only one could be selected. Jason didn't hesitate long and chose the one that perfectly suited rescuing his sister. Meanwhile, the thugs brought the girl to their base. As they rode the elevator up, the lights suddenly flickered and strange shadows danced around them. One of the thugs felt that something was moving toward him from the darkness. Jason emerged directly from the shadow. His new skill, Shadow Conjurer. It allowed him to control shadows and move through them. And if he had an item or blood of his target, he could teleport directly to them. That was exactly how he found them. The thug didn't even have time to swing his knife. In the next moment, he was lying unconscious. The second one screamed in terror, "He's an awakened!" But Jason himself didn't understand who these awakened were, or why everyone kept calling him that. The elevator doors opened and the thug called for backup. Jason immediately knocked him out. A crowd of goons from the floor charged at Jason, but his new ability made them helpless. They couldn't even touch him. Jason effortlessly took them all down. Reaching his sister, he removed her handcuffs and blindfold. He told her to go home. As for himself, he stayed behind. He wanted to test something. Jason began climbing the floors, beating up every bandit who stood in his way. At that moment, the gang leader's phone rang. He answered irritably, as he hated being disturbed while relaxing. His men were begging for help, admitting they couldn't handle Jason. Those words enraged the leader so much that he smashed the phone on the table with one swing of his hand. Jason was already finishing off the last of the bandits, when suddenly the wall of the building collapsed. He barely had time to turn his head. A giant man was flying toward him at incredible speed. The man grabbed Jason's head and slammed him into the ground with full force. Jason realized that this opponent also possessed superpowers. And it seemed that his mother and sister knew about the existence of such people, since they weren't surprised at all when they saw his powers. Jason used his ability, but despite his massive size, the leader turned out to be astonishingly agile and easily dodged. Realizing the danger, he decided to fight at full strength, but it didn't help him. One punch from Jason was enough to disfigure his face. The hit threw the man against the wall, which creaked, ready to collapse. The leader couldn't understand how he, so experienced and strong, was losing to an ordinary guy. While he was lost in thought, Jason kicked him, finishing the opponent off. This man was the cause of his family's suffering. Jason had no intention of holding back. When the leader realized he wasn't Jason's equal, he began begging for mercy. Beaten with tears in his eyes, he offered money and anything else just to stay alive. Jason, realizing that he currently had no money, couldn't resist the thought of taking advantage of the offer. But as soon as he went for the money, the leader immediately ran away as fast as he could. Getting into his car, he began threatening to kill Jason and his mother. But he didn't even notice that Jason had been standing behind him the entire time. After all, Jason would now always know where the leader was and could find him anytime. Jason managed to get only 500 million won from those bandits. But since he had been in a coma for 10 whole years, he literally didn't know whether that was a lot or a little. Before he fell into a coma, that amount could buy a couple of apartments in Seoul. The first thing Jason decided to do was buy phones for himself and his mother. According to the seller, he bought a new model of a flip phone for almost 3 million won, and also some kind of button flip phone. The seller claimed it was also a new model that was in high demand. He named the price as 2 million, but the seller was clearly trying to trick Jason since he didn't know current prices. At first, the seller offered to sell the phones on installment. But when Jason said he'd buy both phones in cash right away, the seller was clearly shocked. Placing the gifts on the table for his family, he left immediately, not even waiting for their reaction. Jason had a meeting scheduled with an old friend at a small family restaurant. When the friend saw Jason, he was surprised. as Jason had changed beyond recognition in such a short time. Over some drinks, they began discussing what Jason would do next. Suddenly, Jason asked how many floors in a building he could buy for 500 million. His friend was, to put it mildly, shocked. How could Jason have such money after just waking up? After thinking for a bit, he replied that if Jason really had that amount, he could rent an apartment with such a deposit somewhere outside of Seoul. Jason immediately wondered how much apartments in Seoul itself cost, since he didn't understand why prices had risen so much. But during the time he was unconscious, the world had changed drastically. Suddenly, his friend's mood changed sharply. Jason's mother had told him that it was possible he was one of the awakened, so his friend asked him directly if it was true. But Jason couldn't answer right away, since he didn't even understand what awakened meant. His friend just laughed and began telling him what had happened to the world during the time Jason was asleep. After Jason fainted, after some time, various portals began to appear, leading to who knows where. At first, the authorities of different countries were afraid to do anything and only ordered these strange phenomena appearing all over the world to be studied, since humanity had never seen anything like it before, and it was too dangerous to make any hasty decisions. But at one moment, these portals began to open, and from them poured crowds of different monsters. They immediately began attacking people, killing everyone who stood in their way. But the problem was that human weapons had no effect on them. It literally did them no harm. The number of victims was increasing with every passing hour. Neither pistols, nor cannons, nor any familiar human weapons worked on them. But over time, people realized that the only thing that could kill these monsters was aura weapons. Weapons made from the biomaterials of the monsters themselves. There was only one small problem. Such weapons could be used only by the awakened. People like Jason, but at that time Jason was just playing with his new phone. He wanted to boast about his brand new phone. After all, it was the latest model, which had cost him quite a large sum. Looking at it, his friend realized it was just an ordinary flip phone, the kind you could get anywhere now for almost nothing. In general, the awakened had another special ability. They could enhance their bodies by controlling their aura even without using their weapons. And Jason had very quickly restored his body, and according to rumors, had even recently managed to beat up several thugs. Everything literally indicated that he was one of the awakened. But for him, there was only one thing that mattered. Would they pay him if he became awakened? After these words, his friend was not thrilled. Suddenly, the space in front of the guys began to distort. These were new gates that had just decided to open. On the other side stood new hordes of monsters ready for battle, waiting for the moment to be released. Coming out of the portal, they were ready to destroy everything in their path. People began to flee in panic, crying out for help. Jason's friend didn't understand why the portal had opened right now and exactly in this place. But Jason only noticed that these monsters were different from those he had seen in hell. Picking up a small stone from under his feet, he decided to try fighting them. He threw it with all his strength at one of the monsters. The stone shattered against some kind of invisible barrier that surrounded all the monsters and blocked any attacks, except for those delivered with aura weapons. The monster Jason attacked noticed them and became enraged. It immediately lunged at the friends, trying to kill them. Jason's friend only managed to cover his face with his hand, thinking he was about to die. But suddenly he felt his face splattered with blood. Opening his eyes, he saw the monster lying headless at his feet. Jason had torn off its head with his bare hands. Chanyo was stunned that Jason turned out to be so strong and could kill monsters with his bare hands. A few more monsters also rushed at him, but in an instant, their heads exploded into pieces. Seeing how easily Jason dealt with the monsters, it was possible he had become awakened, maybe even above B rank. But now was definitely not the time to think about that, as the monsters were coming closer and closer. People were trapped. The creatures closed the circle, surrounding them from all sides. Clenching his fists, Chanho tried to take the lead and shouted, ordering people to follow him. But at that very moment, the monsters began their assault. They blocked the nearest escape routes, and it became clear. Against such fast and strong beasts, running away would be nearly impossible. Chanyo understood this, and the feeling of helplessness was eating him alive. The monsters were advancing closer and closer, step by step. In the crowd, a desperate cry rang out. A little girl was calling for her mother, having lost her in the chaos of panic. The screams mixed with the roar of the creatures. The slaughter had begun. One of the green brutes, as huge as a tower, swung its clawed hand at the girl. But a young man managed to grab her out of harm's way and rolled aside, saving the child's life. At that moment, Jason arrived. With one crushing blow, he tore the monster's head off. A spark of hope flared in Chanho's chest. With such an ally, they might have a chance to survive. But Jason didn't even look at him and sharply barked, "Get out, you're in the way." Everything happening was being filmed on a phone by the owner of a butcher shop. The viewers of the stream couldn't believe their eyes. An ordinary guy was single-handedly holding off an entire horde of monsters. The cameraman, his voice trembling, commented, "Jason is in danger. He's surrounded." He tried to warn the hero, but it was already too late. One of the monsters struck with monstrous force. Jason was thrown to the side, crashing into a car. The chat of the stream erupted in despair. Viewers were certain this was the end. Meanwhile, Jinho managed to lead the remaining people through the sewers, saving their lives. But he didn't go with them. His heart burned with determination to return and help Jason. The monsters were closing the circle tighter and tighter around the wounded fighter. One of them raised its hand for the final blow, ready to finish Jason off. The camera continued to stream. Millions of viewers held their breath, but the monster's strike never reached its target. It missed. Jason, having gathered the last of his strength, had already managed to take down several other creatures. The crowd of viewers couldn't believe their eyes. He not only survived, but cut his way through the encirclement of enemies. But for the King of Hell, this was only a warm-up. Now he was going to kill everyone, fast and mercilessly. The stream chat exploded with complaints. The picture was blurry, and viewers demanded the cameraman get closer. But he didn't even dare think about it. The risk of dying was too high. And suddenly, a donation. 5 million won. An anonymous viewer promised another 5 if the cameraman dared to get closer and film the fight. The streamer's hands were trembling with fear. No money was worth a life, but the donations kept pouring in. Another 5 million for personal information about the mysterious hero. The phone was literally exploding with payment notifications, but the cameraman still refused. Fear held him frozen. And then came a massive donation, 20 million, followed by a message. If he recorded Jason's face, he'd get 40 more. It turned out the money came from a well-known company that specialized in clearing monster zones. Their people were already moving toward the battle site, and Jason impressed them so much they wanted to recruit him. Some monsters were already hesitating. They saw how easily he was killing their kin and froze in fear. But the leader would not tolerate weakness. He killed one of his own to make the rest charge into battle. Pressured by the chat and the donations, the cameraman finally crept closer, trying to catch a glimpse of the hero's face. But Jason thought only about cutting his way through the ever-growing wave of enemies. His strength was fading fast. At that moment, Chanho returned. He noticed the streamer hiding behind a car, approached him, and ordered him to evacuate. The shopkeeper flinched in shock, dropping his camera. Viewers thought he was dead. Chanho tried to drag him to a safe place, but the man cared only about his phone. Their path was blocked by yet another monster. Overwhelmed by panic, the shopkeeper fainted and Chanho froze, realizing he'd have to carry a grown man right under the nose of a monster. Jason noticed what was happening and without hesitation grabbed a weapon from one of the monsters. Throwing it with incredible force, he hit another creature right in the head. It fell dead instantly. Taking advantage of the brief respite, they both ran into the shop to take cover and catch their breath. Jason understood that time was short and was preparing to leave them for a while. Chanho assured him there was no need to worry. Representatives of the clans were expected to arrive soon. The mention of clans caused mild surprise in Jason, but Chanho decided not to go into details yet, intending to explain everything later when they were safe. At that moment, a system notification appeared before Jason, stating that the realization had reached 100% due to the destruction of monsters, and now he had access to all Pantheon items. Without wasting time, Jason activated a portal and entered it. Chanho was stunned by what he saw. He had never encountered anyone capable of opening portals on their own, and even began to doubt whether the person before him was truly Jason. Once inside the Pantheon, Jason immediately checked the level of his magical power. To his disappointment, only 10% of his former strength remained. He had previously assumed his weakness came from the lack of his personal weapon, but now it was clear the reason lay deeper. To restore his full power, he asked the system for the fastest way to increase magical energy. The system immediately suggested systematizing his personal journal. After the process was complete, the locations and times of new missions would be revealed, and completing them would yield rewards. Jason didn't immediately understand which journal it meant, but soon remembered his old notes made in hell to preserve his sanity. He accepted the system's suggestion and activated the systematization process. Before his eyes appeared that very diary that had once helped him survive amid endless suffering. The pages opened, releasing memories of the past. Everything he had endured in hell came rushing back to him. Pain, despair, sleepless nights, and endless battles. It became unbearably painful for Jason to relive those memories, so he asked the system to skip ahead to the moment when he first obtained magical power. The system transported him to the events on the 16th page, to the time when he was in the Predator's forest, having already spent 5 long years and 75 days in hell. Meanwhile, in the small shop where Chanho and the shopkeeper were hiding, movement began. The shopkeeper regained consciousness, and together they tried to climb higher up the building, hoping to increase their chances of survival. The man accompanying them kept glancing at Chanho and Jason, trying to figure out how they were connected. He knew these two acted too smoothly together to have met by chance. A thought flashed through the man's mind: the 40 million reward for revealing Jason's identity. And he cautiously tried to start a conversation about him. But Chanho was too experienced in such matters and immediately understood the real reason behind his curiosity. He realized that the man had been offered money for information about Jason. Chanho ordered him to be silent and stay quiet. There might still be surviving monsters hiding on the roof. At that moment, Chanho's phone received a notification that his clan's evacuation team was delayed because it was the weekend. After that message, Chanho could only hope for Jason and for his swift return. Meanwhile, the system activated a new mission for Jason, connected to the restoration of his former strength. He had to destroy a celestial being that had taken over the Predator's forest. Upon completing the mission, his magical power was expected to increase significantly, and his realization level would rise. A moment later, that celestial being appeared before him, a giant towering titan hidden in thick fog. Noticing Jason, the monster attacked him with a powerful beam of light shooting from its eyes. Fortunately, Jason was agile enough to dodge the attack. Realizing that long-range strikes were useless, the giant decided to switch to close combat. Jason didn't have time to prolong the battle, so he decided to finish it as quickly as possible. With a lightning-fast strike, he shattered the creature's head and knocked it to the ground. However, the monster was resilient. It rose again and tried to attack Jason with its fingers, stretching them out like tentacles. Jason had to deliver another blow, this time to the creature's abdomen, after which its body crumbled to dust. In the place where the monster died, a strange red orb appeared. Its presence gave Jason an eerie feeling, something between fear and inexplicable shock. Meanwhile, Chanho and the shopkeeper reached the rooftop and saw the lifeless bodies of people lying motionless around them. Suddenly, one of the men leaning against the wall began making wheezing, broken sounds, like he was coughing. Chanho realized the man was still alive and rushed to him, hoping to help in time. They tried to ask about his condition, but he could barely speak. Gathering his last strength, he managed to say only one word: "Run." At that moment, Chanho sensed a presence behind him. Turning around, he saw a monster standing at the entrance to the building. The shopkeeper suggested that Chanho grab the man and run, but it was already too late. The monster blocked their path. Chanho ordered everyone to stay still and not move until his signal. The young man accompanying them didn't immediately understand what was happening, but when he turned around and saw the creature, he barely suppressed a scream. He forced himself to stay calm and think clearly. Their only chance to survive was to reach the door before the monster attacked. Suddenly, the monster let out a piercing roar, giving them a single chance. While it was distracted, they could try to reach the exit. Chanho gave the command to run, and they dashed toward the door. Meanwhile, in the Pantheon, Jason stood before the fallen monster's core, which had begun a regeneration process. It analyzed his attacks and tried to adapt, rebuilding the creature's body with enhanced abilities. Jason knew he had to destroy the core immediately. Otherwise, the monster would regenerate and become even stronger. Suddenly, an energy projectile flew toward him, and he barely dodged it in time. Several more monsters of the same type appeared, and according to the mission, he now had to fight them all. Jason realized that he needed to shatter the core first. Otherwise, he would have to battle multiple opponents at once. Under heavy fire, he made his way toward the core, dodging attacks. Finally, he struck it with such power that the core shattered before it could regenerate the monster. Jason understood that defeating such beings this way would be extremely difficult, so he decided to draw upon his own memories. In Hell, he had fought similar creatures before and hoped to recall something useful. He focused deeply, plunging into his memories, reconstructing scenes from the past. Within seconds, he remembered crucial details of his battle tactics. At the same time, Chanho and the shopkeeper were running with all their might toward the exit, trying not to get caught by the monster. The creature lunged after them but couldn't fit through the doorway. Only its massive clawed arm managed to reach inside. The men hid in a corner, avoiding its swipes, while the monster scraped the floor with its claws, trying to reach them. Realizing it couldn't get to them, the creature growled and retreated. Chanho and the shopkeeper decided to go downstairs in search of a safer place. In the Pantheon, Jason continued dodging attacks from celestial guardians who assaulted him one after another. Despite the intensity of the battle, he had his own plan. He was trying to lure them into a specific area. When the guardians reached the intended spot, Jason stopped, preparing his trap. As soon as they lunged at him, the ground beneath their feet began to shake. From underground burst forth a massive swamp whale, swallowing all the guardians in one tremendous gulp. This creature, familiar to Jason from his time in hell, had the same insatiable appetite as before. The Guardians had no chance of escape. The whale's stomach acid could dissolve anything. With the Guardians destroyed, the mission was complete and Jason received a significant power boost. As a bonus, the system rewarded him with a special item, the Judge's Dagger. This sacred artifact once belonged to celestial judges and was forged using unique technologies. The dagger could be remotely controlled within a range of 100 meters, and its power depended on its wielder's strength. Jason immediately tested the new weapon, throwing it forward and experimenting with its remote control capabilities. Convinced of his growing strength, he decided it was time to return to Earth. Meanwhile, news channels were actively discussing the incident near Nangokdong. Due to the opened gates, the entire district had fallen into chaos, and the situation resembled the Daegu catastrophe. The main issue was that the area was under the management of the Hunter Association, yet even they couldn't cope with the escalating threat. The portals were opening randomly, so everyone had to be ready for danger at any moment, even on weekends. Hunters rushing to the site of the incident watched the TV news reports. Many of them were frustrated. Their pay didn't match the risk of the job, and even with specialized technology, predicting the next portal's location was impossible. More genres are coming soon. Subscribe to unlock them all.